welcome to Process to Perform, helping you harness your potential on the way to greatness. I'm your host, Mike Wall. Hey, if you've enjoyed these podcasts, please subscribe and rate the show on iTunes. And as always, this show is specifically designed to help athletes get to the next level. So any questions you have, hit me up on Twitter at UnrivalledESS or email me at info@unrivalledsystems.com. Now that that's out of the way, this episode we have our first guest on. Matthew Hayes is currently in charge of football operations for the XFL Seattle Dragons. He was a national championship high school coach at Bellevue High School up in Seattle, Washington with Butch Goncharoff. He's spent the last 3 seasons on Doug Peterson's staff, the Philadelphia Eagles during training camp, and now he's working with NFL legend Jim Zorn, the XFL Dragons. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing well, and thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I also want to mention you've done a lot of really interesting stuff in your life. And one thing you're doing now is you're working at a company, Nordis, a biotech company. And you were telling me about it yesterday, manufacturing mini chips to manufacture organs. You just want to expand on that a little bit before we get going?
Yeah, so Nordis is a biotech company that manufactures a microfluidic chip to grow mini organs. We really believe that this is going to be part of the future of drug development. Anytime you can replicate the human body outside the body to give a real meaningful result, it's a lot closer to driving information than trying to drive information out of an animal. Although it's been great, a lot of animals are harmed, for one, in that way that are necessary. But two, they're genetically made up differently than humans. So that is what we're doing at Nordis.
Well, the reason I wanted to have you on, Matt, you have experienced coaching success at many different levels. You have you're now in a leadership position with the Seattle Dragons, and this podcast is Process to Perform. I want to know your thoughts on athlete development, what you've seen. You grew up around a very successful NFL family, and you've been around a ton of elite athletes, as well as being an athlete yourself. So I just really love to get your perspectives to go through this on what you've seen, what you've experienced starting in maybe at high school up through the NFL ranks and now with the XFL.
Yeah. So, again, I have a wide span right now of experience with different levels of athletes from high school all the way to professional. And I think the one thing that really jumped out at me when you asked the question was coaches are more tolerant of players not knowing or maybe willing to figure out a way to wrap the game around them at a younger level. So your best high school athlete has to stay on the field in high school. And if they couldn't remember the play, which way to go, they'll slap a blue wristband on them and a red wristband, blue for left, red for right. And they're going to figure out a way for that high school star to stay on the field. In the NFL, they're not going to slap a blue or red wristband on them to keep them on the field. They're just going to get someone else that can figure it out. So, yeah, I think that's my the biggest takeaway is coaches become less tolerant of players not knowing what to do.
That's interesting you say that, Matt. You're saying that there's a tolerance, and I think we can all agree that we have more tolerance for an 8-year-old than a 16-year-old, than a 24, than a 32-year-old. As you move up the ranks, there's an expectation that you're going to be able to have this foundational knowledge of what's going on around you. You have a certain level of technique. Americans want to win. Winning is above all else, but at what age is it more important to win than it is to develop those kids? If you look across different countries, I think development is more important at some very advanced ages compared to the United States than what we look at. And so for our athletes, part of the problem is, and this is why you see so many personal trainers, so many things outside of what's going on just in the team environment from a development standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, from a lesson standpoint, because there is a huge responsibility on athletes now to develop on their own. It's not just, hey, we're going to go to the practice, we're going to go to a team practice and develop, we're going to go to our individual practice and develop. We also have other things that we must do.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think if I could add to that, I think, what athletes, younger athletes, and as they progress through their career, they need to worry about what they can control. And what they can control is how they study, how they eat, how they work out, how disciplined they are, how repeatable their actions are. And the rest will take care of itself. And, I jump out to Bellevue High School at Butch. The reason why he's able to go into a Texas high school and compete when he doesn't have equal players is because he actually does. He's one of the few coaches that has a scheme that he will make and enhance a player better than he should be. So I think those are two quick little one-offs to support what we're talking about.
Yeah. So Butch ran an incredible program at Bellevue High School. He was a national championship winning coach. And I remember thinking to myself, so I was with you guys for a brief moment after I retired, and because I retired in my last year was with the Seahawks. I remember that he ran the most detailed and disciplined practice that I had ever been around, high school, college, or pro. It was insane. And so when you watch a guy operate like that and the level of detail that he's expecting out of these athletes, you certainly had to take, a lot of lessons away from him kind of off the field as well. He's produced a ton of pro guys too. And so coming from a small school and not having the talent pool that other people have, is it just a function of he's teaching guys to do it the right way and, still fostering curiosity, still fostering those non-negotiable character traits that we'll probably get to a little bit later? I mean, what is it about a guy like Butch specifically? Get a little more detailed into what these kids are taking away from kind of each interaction with a coach like Butch.
Yeah, I think, at the high level, Butch cares the most about people. And I think anytime you walk into his program, he is a people person first, where he cares more about the player and their family above anything. So in this win mentality that you talked about, every guy has to win in high school and all this stuff. He cares more about the player, and it's less about winning. It's more about developing men with moral character and, in life situations. And I think that type of buy-in builds a strong bond. And then, from there, absolutely, there's not a mistake in his practice plan. He knows exactly what he's doing, why he's doing it. And because of that trust and bond and the results, that's a very easy, when you're winning, it's very easy to buy in, right? But because of the trust and the moral teachings of life, the football supports it.
So when you go to when you're in the high school level now, and when I was in high school, I went to a small school, and we did not have, I was never above 500 in high school. I think I'm the only player I've ever met, like in college or pro, that never had a winning season in high school football. And we didn't have any adherence to, technical discipline. All the things that I teach now are kind of or I preach now are kind of a result of having no sort of background in it, and then suffering mightily from that as a youth, right? So I'm just interested. I know that you went to Severian, and then you coached with Butch. So your high school experience was different than mine, and then obviously being around a guy like Butch.
What's it like being in a Butch Goncharoff system? What are the details of blocking, of tackling? Like, what do you take away from that experience being with a guy like that who's so disciplined and detailed?
No, that's absolutely firsthand at Bellevue. I can't speak for the rest of the high school, and I know, as you go higher up the food chain, it definitely becomes true. But yeah, Butch, if he's going to work on a play or a concept, most likely it's going to be fractionalized, where a part of the offensive line will go to one area, the other part will go to a different area. The wide receivers, for example, will be working, the tight ends. They're all working on this one play individually to really magnify the technique, what angle their first step is. And if it's not exactly 45 degrees, you're doing it again. So, yeah, absolutely. Your point is well taken at Bellevue. They're very, very down to detail-oriented practice.
So yeah, I love that. And one thing that I know about you, one thing you're really good at is taking complex ideas and breaking them down into like smaller, more digestible bites. And so is that something you just grew up with, or is that a learned skill? Because when you talk to at any level, when you're talking to your friends, when you're coaching on the sidelines, I've seen you firsthand really be able to break down these complex. I always think like when a coach talks about pad level, for example, pad level is a big idea, right? Whether you're on offense or defense, there's a lot of things that go into why your pad level might be too high. So the coaching point of get your pad level down it doesn't really cut it for an athlete, because there's too much going on to just think about, I'll just get my pads lower, right? You might have an ankle issue. You might not be able to decelerate. Your feet might be too wide. that first initial step might be behind you. You might be stepping underneath yourself, but you have a really a good learned skill of being able to break these things down into smaller portions. Like, where does that come from for you?
Honestly, I've been fortunate and lucky to be around a lot of amazing people. I mean, even most recently with Mr. Zorn in Seattle, being able to work 5 or 6 years with him, and all these other friends, yourself, Matt Hasselbeck, the list could go on and on, but I've been fortunate enough to grow up where I've seen real life examples. So I was able to practice, harness it, learn it, observe it throughout the years of my life. So,
it's awesome that there's a guy like, or the program that they were running at Bellevue is there. And then you look right down the street at the Seattle Seahawks and the program that Pete Carroll runs. Mm-hmm. Because when he came into the league, it seemed like everybody was doing things one way. And he came in and kind of said, I'm going to just continue to run this. This USC college program works pretty well, where I get guys that I really like. I coach them up really hard. I create an incredible amount of competition in my practices and enthusiasm. I expect a lot out of them. I treat them like men. I love them. And I put them on the field early. And I'll play them and I'll work them for 4 years. And if they're really good, then they stick around. If not, I'll recycle through. And he's had, such an incredible amount of success over there. It's just, I've always wondered, because I haven't been around Seattle since I retired. And I don't know Pete firsthand, but I've admired him from distance. Mm-hmm. When you look at that Seattle Seahawks team in town, is that all a direct reflection of just who he is as a man and a coach? Has he just had an incredible amount of luck with, the kind of guys that he's drafted with, the Earl Thomases and the Bobby Wagners and the Richard Shermans, or is it just a combination of both?
Yeah, so I have not been around the Seattle Seahawks staff. I do know some of them, and they're amazing people, and they're amazing coaches, and they're really smart. What I can tell you is, whether we talk about Butch or Mr. Carroll, winning usually isn't a mistake. And the fundamentals that, Mr. Carroll learned through his coaching, whether it's at USC or the NFL, prior, they're fundamentally sound in what they know. They're fundamentally sound in how to work their system. And none of it is a mistake. So I think one of the coolest things, where we just talk about two different coaches in two different levels, knowing your craft and how to work it, and knowing all the minute details will bring success. And owning your system, right? Mm-hmm. Butch's system is completely different than Coach Carroll's system, right? But they know what they're doing, they know how to work it, and they know how to produce results from it. So I think when systems are flawed and you get the wrong technique, I think a lot of people nowadays will think there's a quick answer. If I run a scheme, it will just work, without truly getting down to the core fundamentals of what you need to do to make it successful. And you brought up two guys that know core fundamentals, like first principles. Elon Musk would talk about an atomic principle, the first principle. What is the first principle of anything that nothing can be wrong from, right? And these coaches know how to get down to the first principle.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so now that you're in the XFL and you're looking through kind of a new lens, you have these players that a lot of these guys are probably good enough to play at maybe even play in the NFL. They're good enough to play at a high level. Some of them are just out of college, and I'm just wondering, with you have a little bit of a reduced time frame just because of the way the season's fallen out. You have less games. I think you have less opportunity for preparation before that, and you understand how important those fundamentals are. So how do you and how does Coach Zorn go into a situation where your guys probably aren't at the maybe technical caliber or football IQ caliber that you would, hope for as a group? I'm generalizing, obviously. So how do you go about kind of figuring out what the best way forward is, as far as, okay, should we just put in a scheme that's going to beat everybody, or do we need to really focus in on the fundamentals? Do we have enough time to do that? What has that approach been like?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I think, both on the offensive side and the defensive side for our team, we have prepped this like a professional team. Mr. Zorn has more professional experience than I think I have years on earth, which is amazing. Clayton is no shab either. He's a defensive coordinator, and he has a lot of NFL experience as well. And these guys, just like Coach Carroll, you said, our coaching staff treated them like men. And, that we treated like a professional team. So our scheme was professionally based. I know some other coaches around the league, after breaking down some film, maybe didn't have that take. They ran maybe more of what they call a college offense. And I don't think one is right or wrong, but I think that's what happened this year. So
when you see these guys that are coming into, so you've seen players at every level. So when you see guys that come into the XFL, and you know there are some guys there that have the talent, right? And they're sometimes they're missing what I call non-negotiable character traits. So they haven't been, those character traits haven't been maybe fostered as much. And I'm talking about things like competitive mindset, coachability, presence, and confidence. A lot of these guys are just out of college now, right? And do you see a disconnect with kind of the character traits needing to be fostered, and how they're being prepped for this moment versus maybe when, we're kind of a generation back now, as far as being in our early 20s and trying to come out and thinking about being, high level athletes. And I just feel sometimes there's a little bit of a lack of curiosity from younger players now, because everything's kind of been hand fed to them. What's your take?
Yeah, so I think it's another great question. I think I've been extremely lucky in life to be around people that have amazing work ethics. And, I don't know what it's like to have an 11-year career in the NFL like yourself, but maybe you could chime in. When you got to Green Bay and you got to see the work ethic of, let's say, Reggie White, what is that like? And how easy is it to kind of fold in to say, wow, there's one of the best players to ever walk, the face of the earth, and this is how hard he works. I need to work this hard or develop some of these skills or adapt, pull these into my repertoire, if you will, to make my life or to make my career go anywhere. And I think some of the younger players haven't had the ability to walk alongside, a Mike Wall, a Matt Hasselbeck, a Reggie White, a Drew Brees, whoever these guys are, to say, wow, it's not a mistake. He doesn't just wake up and, just win, right? I mean, he puts a lot of time and effort in. So yes, go ahead.
You and I were both around Walter Jones, obviously in different capacities, but Walter Jones, I tell everybody that Walter Jones is the best football player I've ever been around in my life. And I've been around some pretty good ones.
Sure.
He's hands down the best player I've ever been around. And I was there during my last season, was also really his last season. I think he was maybe on the team for another year, but he was effectively done that year with injuries. And he was still the best player I'd ever seen, which is really remarkable. Walt has this kind of personality that you have to he's very gregarious. He cracks a lot of jokes. He's always smiling. He's got a ton of self-confidence. And it's very easy if you're a younger player to look at him and go, well, Walt's not, Walt's kind of in a good mood and not maybe dialed in or not taking things as seriously as the guy in the corner. So maybe I don't have to either. And you really had to look hard at Walt when you watched him actually perform his craft to understand that he took everything very, very seriously. And he was very intent on being the absolute best. And he was very intent on literally crushing your soul if you were his opponent. But he was just, he was so confident, and he had this just way about him that he could do all of that and not have to listen to Pantera before the game, and or he didn't have to, bang his head against the locker. He wasn't that kind of guy. He didn't need to be that kind of guy. He could laugh it off and be like, oh, see how I just picked up that defensive end and ran him 30 yards and dumped him into the stands. Like, haha, that was pretty funny. He was that kind of guy. But I think one of the things that I saw, coming into my 11th year and seeing these younger guys around him, where that they didn't quite understand that personality was, one, kind of unique to him, but two, that confidence and that ability to kind of go around like what the weight of the world wasn't on your shoulders, had to be earned. Mm-hmm. And so we had a lot of young guys back then kind of trying to be jokers all the time instead of really trying to be masters of their craft, not understanding that because Walt was the leader in the room, obviously, but not understanding that Walt had already done everything that they could ever hope to do, and he was doing it every day. He just was able to do it with a different personality trait. So I think it just takes all different. It takes all different kinds, and you have to be unique to yourself.
Yeah, I think that's dead on. And I can give you one experience. Actually, I feel like it repeated like Groundhog Day every year with the Philadelphia Eagles. Rookies or free agent signees would come in and say, hey, I've heard you've been around a few years now. What does it take to make this team? Or, how do I make a roster spot? I said, it's very easy. You need to know your assignment. The coaches have to be able to trust you, right? You have to not only do your assignment, but make a play, a little extra. And then you need to be on every special teams. And, some people would say back, well, Walter Jones doesn't have to be on special teams. And I said, listen, here's the deal. Walter Jones doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to do because he's Walter Jones, or someone like a Walter Jones, right? And if we're questioning if you're Walter Jones, you're not Walter Jones. It should be super obvious who the ultimate star is on this team. And the fact that we're talking about it, it's not you, I promise. So until you hit and accomplish everything you've ever wanted to accomplish in your career, that's when you can say, I won't be on field goal, right? Or field goal block or whatever you want to be. So I think your point's well taken, that young guys need to get on it to say, I need to own and know everything there is to know about this team to give myself the best shot to stay in the NFL or whatever team they're on. College, you could be college. You could be fighting for a college spot, but how do you get on the field? Hey, you go to talk to that special teams coach and say, I need to be on every kickoff return. I need to know every spot there is, because that gets you on the field.
Matt, you're absolutely right. There's finding a way to get on the field or to get into the game, no matter what sport you're playing, is so important. We're very fortunate in football that there's all these different positions you can play. Like if you can't fit in on the first team at linebacker, you can play special teams or whatnot. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to do that. You see in all different sports. One of my favorite positions is like the goon, the old goon in hockey. Like there's a way to get on. You can find value if you're willing to sacrifice something, whether that's, being the goon, being the pain guy, or you're a guy like Vinny Johnson, the microwave off the Detroit Pistons, used to come in and he was able to kind of light up the scoreboard here for a short amount of time when he came into the game and really give that team a boost. So there's a way to find yourself on the field, given that you're willing to work hard enough and find that niche. And, I know from my personal experience, I was very lucky to come out of the academy where we were so happy just to be playing football. Because if you were, especially as a freshman, if you went back to Bancroft Hall after school hours over, that was military time. That meant that the older classmen could just give you a really bad rest of the day until it was study hall. And so just the ability to go out and play was such a joy and a relief and an outlet that we practiced so hard. So when I got to the league, I realized that I practice harder than most of these guys are used to practicing. Like I can put up with a lot from that standpoint. I can go a lot harder for a longer amount of time than they're willing to go because maybe they're trying to preserve their careers. There's always that idea of is it better to burn out than to fade away? A lot of guys don't mind fading away, and I'd rather just burn out. I'd rather give you everything I possibly could have and be the best player that I could be, and then just see what happens after. But what are those? I guess what are those things that you look for as a coach and now as somebody who's running football operations when people get get into your building, what are you looking for? What is so important to you to get them on the field or to maintain their presence in the locker room?
Yeah, I think so. You bring up an interesting point, and I'm going to talk about from the, I guess, maybe the coaching side looking out, maybe not the player side, the coaching side. And this really applies to, I think, every level. You're always being evaluated. You're in high school, maybe a college, trying to figure out, do we want to give you a scholarship, right? Maybe you're in college, some NFL teams trying to figure out if you fit in, or, NBA team or whatever, right? It doesn't really matter. It's whatever sport you're playing, someone's watching you to figure out what separates you from the other person, right? Because they're all trying to figure out, if you're in sports, where the next deal is. So, and the same thing we get to NFL training camp, right? Hey, they overload their camp to figure out who the best, they're going to whittle it down to the best. So now you have a month long of comparing. Who does this better than that? How many more positions can this guy play? How many errors does he play? How much does he produce? Does he make the tackle? Does he miss? And I know it's the same across every sport. So the other thing I'd say is you can't fake passion. That's something I realized early on. And I had a conversation with Jim Schwartz, who's the defensive coordinator in Philadelphia, who's a former head coach. I'll probably have another head coaching job in the near future. And he pulled me aside and he goes, gosh, you can tell you love this. Like, you have all this other stuff in the world going on. You can do anything you want. And you're here right now at 6 a.m. or midnight doing a project for me. And you can tell you're not faking your passion. This is really what you want to do. And that's what I'd say to the young people out there is, to your point, watch film or hit the weight room every day or whatever you're going to do. If you're faking it, people are going to know. You have to truly love what you're doing. And if it's not, I think that's okay. Figure out what you love and try to do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And for those, you've been around a ton of coaches. You just mentioned Jim Schwartz. Oh. When a player in any sport has that drive and has that motivation, that passion, what it comes really crucial at that point is, do they have somebody in their life that can point them in the right direction? Do they have that coach or that mentor in any, I guess, aspect of sports or business? Do you have that person that can push you in the right direction? So when you've been around kind of some of these best, what are some of the best coaching characteristics that you've been around, and how do you see that manifest in the attitude or the preparation or the, I guess, maybe the output of their players?
Yeah. So I think, whether it's Jim Schwartz, Jim Zorn, these guys are so crazy smart and they just know everything, and they will dive into the fine details, and they want to give it to their players. I think that is a trait that is 100% consistent with all the successful coaches. They do not pretend to know. They actually know, the core details of everything they're teaching. And I think, looking back on it, especially with, last 3 years in Philadelphia, or even with the XFL, I would question how often the players take advantage of using them as a resource, because you have arguably one of the smartest guys in the room, if not the smartest guy in the room, as Jim Zorn, Jim Schwartz, these coaches, and how often are you taking advantage of their knowledge? I don't know. So
yeah, that's a great point. So, and you've been around, Doug Peterson and Jim Zorn both played NFL quarterback. And so what do you see from, is there anything that so NFL quarterbacks are a different breed. If you look at everybody in the room and then you go, okay, where's the smartest guy in the room? It's always that guy. So do you see anything different from them as compared to other coaches you've been around, as far as maybe the granularity of detail or just the way that they look at the game or prepare? Because I always think that's, I've sat in those different rooms, and I've always, like, the language is just a little bit different when you get with the ex quarterbacks.
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. Ex quarterbacks, I would say and then you start moving to coordinators and head coaches, right? I would throw Jim Schwartz in there, a guy I got to work with, Ken Flagel, another coordinator. They have the same mindset as a quarterback because they understand everything. They know what the offensive line's doing, the tight end's doing, the running backs are doing. They know what the receivers are doing. They know how if one player does one thing incorrectly, how it influences the domino of everything else. So I would they're a different breed, and their attention to detail is even further. That's why I think it's a mistake if you're a player, whether it's in high school, college, and you're not getting with your quarterback coach or head coach or coordinator, or who you think the smartest guy is, and having them teach you and learn and ask questions. It's a big mistake. You want to know as much as you can, and you want to pull that information out. You want to take a ton of notes, and you want to study it on your own.
So I think Jim's in the Ring of Honor up in Seattle, and obviously, coached at the highest level. So working with him closely, what are his expectations for preparation with regards to players specifically? So maybe not quarterbacks, but kind of what does he expect a guy? So let's say you have a Saturday game, so your first work day is Tuesday. What is the expectation of that guy on Tuesday? Like, if that guy comes in, he needs to already have done what, or he needs to be prepared to do what that day?
Yeah, I think to be able to understand and watch film on the team we're playing, to understand, look up who if we're offensively looking from the offensive side, right? Who the defensive coordinator is, what type of, front is he playing, what type of personnel, what did they do last week, what did they do the previous few weeks. I think he wants that player to own what another quarterback or head coach would want is who are we playing, what are they good at, and what do they do? What are their tendencies? Those type of things.
Mm-hmm. But I've just always found it interesting that the expectation for, I guess, preparation is, in my experience over, being, I guess, in 6 or 7 different ball clubs now, is just, there's a different expectation in preparation for every place. And you always think at the highest level, it's going to be somewhat uniform, but it really isn't.
Yeah. What were your experiences like for your teams?
Well, it would differ from everything you just said to, at another level, you just show up on Wednesday, they give you the playbook. So it was Wednesday, not Tuesday, for Sunday games. You get the playbook, and your week kind of started there. It was just you coming in as a blank slate. You didn't have to know anything. I think, I just remember early 2000s when word started getting out that like Belichick would quiz his players on Wednesday mornings about, what the coaching tree of the coordinator was and what that meant for what was going on that week. That I think everybody started getting hip to the idea of like, wow, there's some people out there that know a lot more than we do going into week one. I built out my first year back in the league, we went through a coaching change midseason, and I started looking around, and I noticed that the way that young players were preparing was not what I was used to seeing. I thought it was inadequate. So one thing I did that first year for the interim coach, and then for the coordinators and the players, obviously, was just created an expectations and preparation, how to earn the right to play well on Sunday. Like, what does it take to earn the right to play well? And it was, how you go in, what you do on your off days on Monday and Tuesday, how you come in prepared Wednesday, what your practice standard expectations are for how you're going to prepare yourself during the week on the field and off the field, how much film you're going to watch, when you're going to watch it. And so then you step off that last walkthrough on Saturday, just knowing you've done everything you can to prepare. You've out-prepared your opponent. You deserve to have a good game because you've put in the work that week. And that's just, I honestly still think that's something it's a little bit rare. You see guys that are really good in the league my last 5 years, guys that have stuck to consistent routines that are demanding and require a lot of them, allow them to be more present in the moments that matter most, because they can go on autopilot, right? I know where I'm going to be at 8:15. At 8:23, I'm going to go do some ankle mobility. I have 10 minutes of pre-practice prep work before I get on the field. I'm going to work out at this time. I'm going to watch film from 8:30 to 9:45 at night. I'm going to eat, blah, blah, et cetera, et cetera. When you get on those kind of routines, it really can allow you to be present in the moment. And I see a lot of success, not only in sports, but in business from this, but it really is a differentiator between kind of have and have nots in the locker rooms I've been in most recently.
Yeah, and I think this circles back to the question you brought up earlier, the expectation, or what are you seeing from players coming out, or habits. And, I think there was an article I remember reading about Ed Reed's experience when he got linked up with Ray Lewis, and Ray Lewis kind of saying, "Hey, you're gonna study with me." And Ed's take on it was, "Well, this guy studies a lot. I didn't realize how many hours of film were going to be here." Almost like he moved into his house type of thing. And I think, to your point, you built a ready, or a ready list, or an expectation. And I think that's I think you just hit it on the head, where a lot of younger players don't understand either what it takes to be professionally ready, right? I say professionally, but not only professionally ready, but to be a great professional, right? We just named Ed Reed and Ray Lewis Hall of Famers, right? The best period of their group, right? Hands down. And they were working that crazy hard. And you have a guy potentially on the fringe of making an NFL team, not willing to work as hard or control what he can control, but put in the hours that an Ed Reed is putting in, right? To me, that's a disconnect. Because if Walter Jones is going to, or Ed Reed, or whoever, Drew Brees is going to put in all these hours, and they're Hall of Fame guys, well, one, that should tell you that's why they're in the Hall of Fame, right? Because they chose to work so hard to improve their play, and the results show. But two, if they're willing to do that and you're not, how are you going to even close the gap? Like, what are we talking about right now?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And we talk a lot about routine development on this podcast, because I think that, habit formation and routine development are really going to determine some of the long-term success of your career. And you mentioned a guy like Ed Reed. So he comes in, and I'm sure he has a routine that he sticks to, but then he gets with a guy like Ray Lewis, and that routine is amplified now. I don't know how many guys, I don't know how many athletes come into, especially in a team setting. In an individual setting, you almost have to be kind of a routine fanatic, right? You have to really be about routine discipline. But in a team setting, I think it's very difficult for guys to come in and have their own personalized routines, or players to come in and have their own personalized routines. Now, obviously, you go into a soccer locker room, baseball, basketball, football, rugby, they're going to have a schedule on the board. And this is how your day is going to look according to what team functions are required. But going through and having a personalized routine that you follow with detail and discipline allows you to free up so much of not only time, but also kind of brain space or brain capacity to focus on those times that, again, really matter to your development. And just to your point, I don't think that a lot of people have the opportunity to talk to a Ray Lewis, or I don't know if everybody has a coach that is demanding that from them. Like, they need to get that from somewhere. You need to have that idea pop in your head before it can manifest.
Yeah, I think to jump, and I know you're from Southern California, I remember reading an article on Reggie Bush. And we all know how great Reggie Bush was. He, dominated the college world, USC, had a great NFL career. And I believe, if I remember correctly, and I can stand corrected, but I believe, he got to work out with the Dana Tomlinson, another Southern California, Charger, amazing professional, right? And, Reggie shows up. And again, I want to point out Reggie and Ed Reed, who we just talked about, where Ray Lewis took them under and LT took Reggie under for a minute. They probably had amazing routines. They were the best, in college football coming out, right? So there's no, their routine was probably amazing, right? I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm just saying they get to, now Reggie works out with LT. First track workout, it throws up, I think, once or twice, he goes, I thought I was in shape. I was ready to roll because I was the most in shape guy in college football, right? And it was just a quick, shocked to go, wow, there's more levels to this than I thought, right? Where the other college guy thought Reggie was at a higher level, and then Reggie gets to work with LT and goes, wow, there's another mountain to climb, right? So it's just one of those deals where you think you're putting in the hours you need, but then, you don't know what the other guy around the corner is really putting in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to switch gears. So I have a non-negotiables list, and I want to get your non-negotiables list. I'm going to give you mine. Okay. And these are, we need to identify and foster these in athletes as early as possible. So, I'm talking, 10, 12 years old, fostering this through how we interact with them, how we treat them, how we set up situations in practice, how we talk about the importance of competitive instances, whether it's a scrimmage, a practice, or a game. So mine are confidence, competitive mindset, presence, coachability, and the willingness to take short-term pain for long-term gain. So I'd love to hear what you think in this day and age, what the non-negotiable character traits are for young athletes.
Yeah, I think I love your list of confidence, coachability, short-term pain for long-term game. I think, and so I would keep all that. I think the only one I would want to add on top, because I think it really I think it drives confidence, coachability, and short-term game, would be preparation. And the reason why I say that is because my belief in coaching is, if you know something to the undoubtedly extreme perfection, if you just know it, right, you don't have to think about it, you're going to be more confident. You're going to be able to listen, understand, right? You're going to play quicker. You're going to read, react. You're going to be able to produce short-term pain for long-term gain. I was taught by Mr. Zorn, there's 4 levels, and I know he got this from someone, I just don't know who. There's 4 levels of competence. There's unconscious competence, right? Mm-hmm. Which is the highest level of competence. That means you're doing something where you don't even have to think about it. You're doing it well. You're doing it without even knowing it. You're just doing it. It's like Michael Jordan shooting a free throw. Like, he does it. It doesn't matter. It's going to happen every day. Then it's and I'm going to go to the bottom. I'm going to go. Let's back this up. I want to start over. So we're going to start with the bottom. The bottom would be unconscious incompetence, which means you don't even know what you're doing is wrong, right? You're out there shooting a free throw. It's below your knees, and it's just like, it's not even probably the right way to do it. Although I'm sure there's a free throw expert that would say it's probably the right way to do it. So I don't know. Then there's conscious incompetence, which is, okay, now I know what I'm doing is wrong. I'm aware of the problem, and maybe I should work on fixing it. Then there's conscious competence, which means I know what I'm doing is right, but I have to think about it to do it right? So maybe you're worrying about false stepping, right? And you have to think about it, and you're actively trying to get rid of a false step, right? And then the last one would be unconscious competence, which is where I started at the beginning. Unconscious competence is you can do something so well you don't have to think about it. Does that make sense?
It's so funny. You just in 2 minutes just talked about the reason I do this podcast, why I wanted to become a skill development specialist. Everything that I've kind of worked on in the last 4 or 5 years is really around what you just said. So,
yeah, and that was taught to me by Mr. Zorn. And,
Yeah.
I was able, so another thing, first of all, you talk about amazing coaches, we talked about Doug Peterson, Mr. Jim Schwartz, but, Jim Zorn, we haven't really spent a lot of time on him, but one of the things that I had the privilege of doing is he's been able to train draftees on, going to the NFL, quarterbacks. And I think his last trainee was Kyler Murray. And he has a long list of them in recent years. But through his trainings, he was able to let me walk alongside him to see how he was training these quarterbacks for the NFL draft. But 2, I was able to learn that specific point. And he was able to pass that information along to his trainees saying, hey, as you go to the NFL, you study something so hard, right, that it becomes unconscious competence. And I believe that is so true and so valuable, because if you know something without even thinking about it, your confidence is going to be up, your coachability is going to be up, your willingness to absorb short-term pain for long-term gain, right?
Mhm.
You're going to play at a higher level and a much quicker level. So that's the only thing I'd add.
Yeah,
To your
that's
question.
you nailed it. So I have this equation I like to use. It's improving your technique improves your ability to make decisions, which ultimately improves your ability to execute whatever scheme is required of you. There's two reasons for that. The direct benefits of becoming a technical master are that, one, you can automate. So your brain works in this way. You bring in information. You have external awareness. Everything that you touch, you see, you smell, you feel. You bring in all this external information. You have internal processes going on in your brain saying, what it is, or what do I have to do and how do I do it? And then you have locomotion, you have action. And if you want to be a true master, it allows you to automate those internal processes. So you don't have to think about how to do things. So let's say your brain is, your brain capacity is, 50-50. I'm experiencing things externally and I'm processing them internally. And then that turns into action. What you want to do is you want to have to be able to shut down that internal process by automating all of your movement patterns. And so again, like to your point, if I don't have to think about how to dribble and I can dribble with my head up, or if I don't have to think about how to shoot that free throw, I can go right into a read and react situation. That allows me to become a read and react kind of player. So now I can think about what the defensive player in front of me is doing, what's going on conceptually in the scheme that we're trying to run, where everybody should be on the court, et cetera, et cetera. So the ability to read and react is directly proportional to your ability to automate those internal processes. You want to reduce that internal processing so you can get more external awareness, read and react faster, right? And then the second thing, like you just said, was if you're a technical master, I can get to somewhere faster and therefore ingest more information to make better decisions. If I'm really good at running a dig route and as a wide receiver in the NFL, my ability to consistently run a dig route is going to help me separate from the defender, see whoever else is around me as I make that turn, adjust to a bad ball. I can do all these things because I'm consistently getting to a spot faster. So, I think it's like two sides of the same coin. That's really why, I believe that technique is the foundation of all our development.
Yeah, and I think to play alongside everything we just talked about, I think it goes back to one of your core philosophies. To be in this realm, right? You need to have habits, routines. You need to understand details. You need to understand fundamentals. You need to work at the stuff constantly, day in and day out, to get to where you want to go and to reap the benefits of everything you just said.
I think about things that mental toughness is something that comes out a lot now. I think Angela Duckworth wrote this book on grit. Anybody out there who hasn't read it, it's an interesting read for sure. There's a guy, Wayne Goldsmith, who has these kind of 3 tenets of mental toughness that I thought were very smart, because he shows that mental toughness, or he's trying to demonstrate that mental toughness is something that you earn. It's not something you have. It's something you earn. It's a learned behavior. And so the tenets of mental toughness are, you have to train at an intensity level higher than you're willing to play at. And that doesn't necessarily mean, every practice is going to be,
Sure.
a full on smash fest in football, at least, but you can manipulate the intensity of something by its duration, by the amount of players on the field, by, overloading one side, et cetera. So coaches have, and that's something that a coach has to help with, but you also have to have some internal practice standards of yourself and what your expectations for yourself are in every practice. So number one, you have to practice at a higher level than you're willing to compete, than game day is going to be. Number two, and this is the most important one for me, you have to take a phenomenal amount of pride in understanding that means something, right? You, like, part of your deal, part of your aura, your makeup is that I prep hard, and I know that translates to something important on competition day. That means something to me. And then the third one is, can you do that consistently over the training period? Can you, whether that the training period is, for a boxer, a 7-week training camp, or is it week to week with the NFL? Is it, a couple of days a week? Because, a sport like basketball or soccer, you have a different routine based on the amount of times they're playing amount of games they're playing every season. But ultimately, are you able to consistently go out there, train at a high level, believe that it matters over your training period? And if you do that, then you show up to these confrontations or these opportunities in sport where you can go in with just a supreme confidence that you've kind of earned this right to go out there and have yourself a really good day.
I think that's awesome. I totally agree with what you're saying, and I think you're right on.
I think we've covered everything from me, Matt. The only thing, just because you're doing so much stuff right now, it'd just be interesting to see, you're wearing multiple hats. What are some of the parallels, just quickly, between what you've been doing in football and then, what do you transition into kind of the business side of your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's everything you just covered, and it's really, no matter if you're, scooping ice cream, working business, playing football, it's the amount of routine, discipline, detail, habits. What are you willing to get up and sacrifice today for the outcome you want, right? And I remember the Olympics with, was it Michael Phelps? He was swimming to break, I think, whatever gold medal it was, to break all the records. And the guy he was competing against decided to look at him. And it was just such and I wish I could just take this picture and give it out, and we could find it probably, but it just harnesses the point of focus on what you can control and don't worry about what you can't. Right. I'm not saying don't see the bigger picture, or don't, if you have dreams to go to the NFL, don't strategically think of how to get there. But once you understand what you want to do, are you really giving every ounce of your effort to studying, lifting weights, dieting, doing the things that you need to do? Are you distracted by going out, having fun, partying? What are these distractions?
Having blinders on, right?
Yeah. Having blinders on. Like, how can you put them on? So I think, I have a lot of stuff going on, but I think it comes down to all the things we're covering for this session. It's just, how detailed and how disciplined and what type of habits you have. So.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Matt, thank you so much for coming on again. Any questions for Matt? Matt, if people want to reach out and hit you on Twitter or something, give us your info.
Yeah. My Twitter is the Matthew Hayes. That's it. So, or you can feel free to email the show, and, I'd love to be back at a future time to support you in any way possible.
Thanks, my man. We'll talk to you soon. Again, thanks for listening. And next week, we will be back with more Process to Perform.